All right, buenos dias. Welcome to another edition of the History of Jazz with yours truly. Today we're going to be continuing on our conversations of fusion, and we're going to discuss a specific individual who kind of encompasses the entirety of jazz history as we've studied it up to this point, almost. You can study his life and really get a true picture of how music developed. Miles Davis, if we already discussed him. So, I mean, if you remember, do you guys remember any of the records that he, was on? Which records do you guys remember? Okay, cool. Well, yeah. So let's dive into it a little bit. Just to tapping in again one more time. He's from East St. Louis. His father was a dentist, and his mother was a violinist. My father's rich and my mama's good looking, and I can play the blues. So he's very gifted from a very young age. He got his first trumpet when he was 13, and he starts playing gigs. And when he's 16, if you think about that, that's like 3 years, which means that he, if you really think about it, his experience with jazz didn't start at 13. It's impossible, for me, it's like it's impossible to think that in those 3 years he just kind of like had all this stuff happen. It's like no. If he had an experience with jazz before, he certainly had an experience of that. Come on, just come on, really, just can't. Why can't you? I don't understand. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Okay, buenos dias, mi gente. It's time for another edition of Jazz History with yours truly. We're going to continue our discussion of fusion, and we're going to dive deep into kind of one person specifically, just because, at this point in history, the entirety of his career, which we've already discussed in bits and pieces, really covers almost everything that we have about jazz history. His life specifically, it just covers so many genres and places. And so if you think about it, he's born in 1926, right? Born in 1926. What is the early experiences that he would have? What's the things that he'd be listening to? I mean, growing up in St. Louis, his father's a dentist and his mother's a violinist. My father's rich and my mother's good looking, and I can play the blues. It was like Miles, he is said to be a gifted trumpet player at 13. Starts playing at 16, and so you think about it, those 3 years, that's not the entirety of where his musical soul came from. It's before that. If you're thinking about, 1926 he's born, what's happening? Fletcher Henderson, Louis Armstrong are kicking strong. That's for sure what's going around. If he's listening to things as a toddler, as a child, stuff like that, going to visiting his grandma in Arkansas, for sure they'd be listening to those guys on the radio. It's on his website that his first records were Art Tatum and Duke Ellington. If you think, and he also had this local connection with the music scene, having, great musicians like Clark Terry, who was part of the Basie and Ellington bands. Those direct connections, that little, mecca of music in that time and place in history, he's right smack in the center of it, from birth. And so, if you think about those 13 through 16, it's not 3 years. It's the development. It's the listening that he did. It's basically his life experience. It's something that you couldn't take out of him. And by the time he's 16 and playing, and he's already playing with regional bands, territory bands, like we discussed in the earlier units. But yeah, he, playing music with Eddie Randall's Blue Devils, aka the Rumba Boogie Orchestra. This is all happening, and he's just around all this great music. And so it's like you couldn't take anything out of him. It's like when you capture, when something is just ingrained from childhood, it never leaves you. And one thing that I think that never left him was this constant yearning to evolve, because it was just always there. If you think about it, 1926, he's born. Every, like, those first, just the first, 20 years of his life, things change so fast. It's so fast. I mean, going from, Louis Armstrong's Hot 5 to Hot 7 to chilling with, Diz and Bird, that happened so quickly. And so that evolution is just kind of just never ending. It was a snowball for Miles, if you really think about it in the grand scheme. Not discussing just the small parts, but in the big picture. Of course, and he lived fast. 1944, graduates from high school and has his first child. Applies for Juilliard, gets in, drops out. Like, he's pushing the envelope. And getting paid to play early too with these crazy bands. So, like I just said, the Blue Devils is a nice little flyer. And here's a video of him, talking about that experience.
You were there in New York City with Bird, Monk, Dizzy, Art. Explain the feeling while you were in New York.
I'm gonna skip that video for the sake of this recording. In that video, he's talking about, the most exciting experience he ever had with his clothes on, obviously. He's vibing, that interviewer. He's always just kind of like confident, because he was just always at the forefront of everything. He was the evolution of music. This quote about, him doing that, I'm going to skip through that as well to get to this presentation. And then, so, if you think about, what I'm just talking about, we just talked about, Louis Armstrong. Think about those sounds and things that we listened to at the beginning of this class, and I just wanted you to take to the end of this class, because I want you to just kind of get this grand scheme of sound differences in one lifetime.
As at least 5 times, but his influence extends beyond music. He affects clothing styles, fashion, the way people speak, their attitudes toward themselves and the world.
Again, I'm going to skip this video for the sake of this video. Oh yeah, so you can hear in that recording, I mean, it's crazy. They're playing with synthesizers. There's an electric bass. It's not swinging at all. It's so different. And so the evolution of his sound from where he started, what he was listening to, most certainly his influences to what he ended up doing at the later part of his life. It's just a grand representation of an evolution of character, of self. He did not allow himself to stay stagnant and stay somewhere. He was always pushing forward, and it led to these crazy experiments of sound. If you think about it, continuing to speak about the influences in all the genres: swing, bebop, cool jazz, hard bop, third stream, modal, avant-garde, fusion, funk. He even had influence on fashion. Think about what he was doing in his early life. Early pictures of Miles, suit and tie, traditional being in the band kind of situation. Look at these pictures. There's literally a book about his style. I mean, think about that. Somebody that constantly needs to change even his clothes. He's just always evolving. He didn't stay anywhere. And even evolved within the mediums of which he represented his art. He later started doing, visual art. These are Miles Davis pieces. He did this. So to think about him as an individual with the grand scheme of his career, looking at the extremes of his career, you can see that it was a life filled of constant shift and change, which pushed, how we got into fusion, which is right, because things are always having to change. So here's a record. This is an interview with Ron Carter talking about how he was introduced into the band.
For a TV,
he's always vibing.
The world
always
is
vibing.
Tell us how 2 years later you came to join Miles.
Let's skip that video again. Of course, don't you love it? How when they talk about Miles, they're always talking his voice like this. Everybody talks about Miles like that. It's so funny. But of course, he's always just vibing people and shifting forward and looking for young talent. How do you evolve musically? You're constantly playing with the upcoming cats. That's how Blakey did it. And Miles, also did it with this, looking for new cats. His second grade quintet. I mean, Tony Williams is 17, man. He's not doing, he's trying to stand out. He's trying to do his thing. And so, yeah, being around this, a certain type of musician will allow your sound, because you are also influenced by people. You influence, but you're also influenced, right? So he was equally influential for them as they were for him. Here's a Herbie interview.
Hey Herbie, it's a real honor to be here.
Thanks, Michael.
What was it like the first time you worked with Miles Davis?
Scary.
Of course, Herbie making fun of Miles in the same way as Ron Carter, the voice. Everybody does it in all the interviews for sure. But yeah, so if you listen to, those guys play in comparison to like what we studied before. I mean, Charlie Parker recordings, if you remember those, were, a different, bebop sounding and stuff like that. Then he ended up doing his thing with, the John Coltrane and all those records that we just discussed, the Rudy Van Gelder recordings. Then we go to, So What? So What is, modal? It's completely removing itself. I mean, from those, you can see the evolution of sound between those. And then he continues with this band. Wayne Shorter, Ron Carter, Tony Williams, Herbie Hancock. I mean, just listening to this sound, it's so removed from Louis Armstrong, but not enough for Miles Davis. That evolution of sound, they're pushing swing, and they're pushing things. With that group, that second grade quintet, they were pushing the envelope, which is something that he just continued to do. Can you categorize what they're doing as jazz still? I mean, yes, but then it starts. This is why we get into all these subgenres. This is why we get into the smaller categorizations, because you can't, like, listening to, Dizzy Gillespie is not the same as listening to Miles Davis in the in the 60s. And they continued, and he starts getting into, I mean, if you think about it, 1961, he's doing Someday My Prince Will Come, and, ends the first grade quintet. Then by 1965, they're recording ESP. Miles Smiles, Nefertiti. He's just kind of just pushing these envelopes, keeps on going, and then he gets to, like, Feliz de Kilimanjaro. I mean, the album art is crazy, and then the sound, like, it's so. I mean, and you got to think about it, because he was who you're hanging out with, right? It's a part of your influence, in real time. And so, little tidbit of information here. This song is actually his response to When Called Mary by Jimi Hendrix. Like, he was hanging out. Like, they were hanging out. They played a music festival together. it's interesting to think of what would have happened had Miles Davis and Jimi Hendrix, did an album together. He was just constantly looking for new people to hang out with and listen to. But if you know the song by Jimi Hendrix, you can actually hear it in this chord progression. So he keeps on pushing things forward. You can start to see that at this point with Chick Corea, Dave Holland, he's fully immersed. We've already discussed Chick Corea and his electric band, how he was pushing the genre forward, and this is he was just getting more and more experimental. Things were not as tight knit. Everybody kind of like almost like collective improvisation. It's weird, almost like a return to street, a street beat, it's like 2-line New Orleans jazz where you have the collective improvisation from the front line, but now it's the whole band. In that regard, at least, and then of course the sounds themselves. They're going off. So then he gets into this album in a silent way. That's the true beginning of his electric band. Tio Macero was an engineer, and basically what happened with these recordings is very interesting. Is that they would go in there and they would record stuff, and he would chop it up. And so now we're even getting into this crazy realm of music history where it's not just a recording of what happened at a gig or what happened in a studio with a band playing together. It's no, like this engineer is going and chopping things up and cut and paste, early cut and paste. The actual tape that they were cutting and pasting by hand, you do with a click, that's where they started. And so, Joe Zawinul, who played with, obviously, famously with Jaco Pastorius, The Weather Report, Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter, Tony Williams, those are the guys were kind of like in his band from that second great band. Herbie Hancock went off and did his own crazy stuff as well. Maiden Voyage is such a pivotal work at that time. And so he's just pushing these envelopes with these crazy casts of individuals. And he, ends up getting these crazy experiences. And this is a crazy, John McLaughlin's talking about his recording experience as a guitarist for In a Silent Way. And it's just like, man, it's such a great interview.
McLaughlin's first experience of working with Davis was recording the classic album In a Silent Way. But the first sessions didn't go well.
Miles didn't like it. So
always vibing.
He came up to me.
Always vibing.
And he said, "Why don't you play it alone?" So I said, "You want the chords and the melody?" "Yes." I said, "Well, it will take me a minute just to get the piano chords on the guitar." "Is that a fact?" Just like putting me on the hot seat, And I was already sweating. I mean, the sweat was running off my body.
He's constantly vibing people, constantly pushing people, just like the same thing with Herbie Hancock and that story that he told. He was always vibing people, but at the same time, he trusted those people. He trusted, and he made music with them. There's the famous recording of Herbie Hancock talking about Miles, where he plays a wrong note in the middle of a tune, and he's like, "Oh man," he's like cringing because he messed up, and he goes, Miles did something, and he played a note that made it right, and so he trusted the musicians that he was around with him to push these envelopes. I mean, who's to say something is wrong, right? And like you can always make it right. You're always a half step away, right? And so he was kind of like experimenting with even those thoughts. What is right? What is anything? Kind of just experimenting. What's music? What is sound? This crazy intro. This is so far removed. Of course, and then people talked about it at that time. Some people hated it. Some people loved it. What do you guys think? What do you guys think about what we just listened to? How does it make you feel? Do you think he went in the right direction? Do you think he should have kept on just doing what he was doing? What are your opinions? Then we get to Bitches Brew, and Tio Macero's still working up this. He's the mad scientist in the laboratory, and he's like, man, basically what he did is he's like record stuff, and they would just play. They're just playing, and he's just recording everything, and he's chopping, and he's they didn't even know. He didn't even know what was going to be and what. It was just it's really just like literally just mad science. And this is an interview with Tio Macero talking about that experience.
I let Miles have a free hand in the studio. And anything that I always encourage him to use electronic equipment.
So look at the amount of people that he had on this thing. I mean, that's incredible. It was just like going at it. They're just going at it. Look how many Miles, Wayne, bass clarinet, guitar, electric piano, 3 pianos, electric bass, 2 bassists, 2 drummers. I mean, how many percussionists? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 4 or 5 drummers. It's just he was just kind of going out there like, let's get together and let's push this music forward. And so you ended up getting this epic recording, Bitches Brew. Even if you don't like it, you know it. Instantly hear that bass clarinet. You hear that? There's no piano sound. Oh, electric bass, no more upright. But hey, man, he's killing it in the record sales. I mean, first gold record after all those years of success. This is his first gold record, so he's just like constantly just getting bigger and bigger, which feeded his ego more and more and more. He could do no wrong, he felt. Second of 9 Grammys. He's recording at the same time, and think about what's happening. This is a gold album during a time where Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix, and the Beatles are also a thing, okay? So think about those sounds and how this album sounds, and it kind of is reflective of culture and how it is evolving at this time. You could talk, and then this is a great recording of Dave Holland, talking about his experience as a bass player.
It's just a monumental record in jazz history. I mean, it fundamentally changed the way the music was viewed, and it brought a young audience that had not previously been interested in jazz into the music.
Oh yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about making of that? Because I've heard various stories about you.
Of course, always making fun of Miles Davis with his little voice and stuff like that. But yeah, again, look, you can even tell in this recording, it's like they're pushing the envelope. And this is the Isle of Wight Festival, the one I was talking about, that he played on the same stage as Jimi Hendrix, as Zeppelin was here as well. This is across the pond, and his influence just global. All reaching, keeps on getting bigger and bigger and bigger. He was larger than life. And so, yeah, what do you guys think about, his life? Is it great? Is it good? So what do you, go ahead and write a paper and listen to this recording and tell me what you think. You don't have to like it. A lot of people didn't. I don't.